All right, time for class. Welcome. Glad you're here, and if you're watching from home, we're glad you're here too. We're working on a class called Jesus and People. The premise behind the class is that we are supposed to be imitators of Christ. We're supposed to walk in his steps, so maybe we can learn something from how he dealt with people. Went through mainly the four Gospels. Whenever Jesus dealt with somebody, I kind of put them in some categories. And we've been through the first three. Jesus dealt with multitudes. He dealt with prospective followers. Then the ones that committed to follow him, disciples. And tonight we're going to start working on the apostles. The apostles are going to take a little bit longer because he dealt with them differently in many ways, the same in some ways, but differently in many ways, because we're kind of working through, started with the crowds, the multitudes, people that just came to see him, what he said to them and how he dealt with them. Then the interested people that said they'd like to follow him, and then those that did decide to follow him, and now we're up to the chosen. Out of all those people that were interested or followed him, Jesus selected 12 of them, and the reason it's going to take us a little while longer is because of what Jesus was doing with these 12. He was training them to carry on his work. He was training them to start the church. And why that's important for us is, what was their mission? He told them to go make disciples. And that's what we're supposed to do. We've got the same mission they do. So maybe we can learn a little more from how he dealt with the apostles. I put a list of the 12 here, and I put them in a order. It's an extremely biblical order, by the way. There are 4 lists of the apostles in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Acts, and all 4 of them are the same order. They list Peter, Andrew, James, and John first, then Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, and Matthew, and then James the Less, Judas, Simon, and Judas Iscariot. Some of the accounts use a nickname or another name, and I've put most of those on this list here. And not real important that we know this, but I think it's worth talking about a little bit first before we really get into how he dealt with them, but maybe this will be helpful for us too. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were kind of the big 3 plus Andrew. We hear a lot about Peter, James, and John, and quite a bit about Andrew. They are mentioned a lot. They were closest to Jesus, which we'll talk about in just a moment. The 4 on the right, James the Less, Judas, Simon, and Judas Iscariot, we know hardly anything about. The Bible just doesn't tell us much about it. It tells us their name, and a few of them we know who their parents were, like James the Less. He was the son of Alphaeus, and his mother was Mary. She was at the resurrection and some of that, but we don't know much about James. We don't even know why he was called James the Less. Don't know if it was because he was of lesser importance than James in the big 3, or it could mean he was shorter than Big James. Could be he was younger than James, the most famous one. So we don't even know that. The middle 4, we get a few bits of information about them, but Jesus picked these 12 to start the church, to make disciples, to carry on his mission. And I think it's interesting to note that with the big three especially, Peter, James, and John, a couple of scriptures help us understand that. Matthew 17:1 says, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, his brother, and led them up a high mountain by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. So at the transfiguration, Jesus had all 12 with him, but he said, Peter, James, and John, come with me. They went up on the mountain. The other verse is Mark 14:33, and this was in the garden right before his crucifixion. It says they went to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, sit here while I pray, and he took with him Peter and James and John. So he took them deeper into the garden, away from the other 9, and had them sit and wait for him there. They were his favorites, I guess you could say. They were closest to him for some reason. And the reason I mention that is, as we're trying to learn from Jesus, I think that tells us that's okay. That's the way it is. We ought to have some people that are closest to us. We can't be equally attached or equally partner with everybody. So even within the 12, which isn't a very big number, but even within the 12, there were 3 that were much closer to Jesus. God may be able to love all of us equally and spend an equal amount of time with us, but humans can't do that. We've got a limit to how many we can be close to in some ways. I got to thinking about that, and I Googled inner circle of friends just to see what came up. And there's about 1 million books written about this. All kinds of psychologists have tried to explain this, and all of them have got different numbers, but all of them look kind of like this. They say that this fellow said we can have 100 casual friends, and 35 good friends, and 10 best friends, and 5 intimates. I'm not sure the numbers, well, I know the number's not accurate. It's a guess. Some people may be able to do better than that or worse than that, depending on what you mean by better or worse. But it's a fact of life. We got 700 or 800 people around here. None of us can be that close to all of them. We've got different levels of friendship, if you want to call it, different levels of closeness. That's one importance of the classes and small groups and other ministries and all that. We get closer. I don't know how many of you are in a small group, but you get closer to the people in your small group that you spend time with and discuss things with. And even within that small group, there's a few that you're closer to, just the way the world works. I use these numbers sometimes. People in the past have told me they don't want to come to Northside, or they think they wouldn't want to come to Northside because it's just too large. And they've been at a church that's got 65 or 100 or something like that, and Northside's just too large. And I usually tell them, well, the psychologists tell us we can only have 50 friends, really. And the benefit to Northside is you get to pick the 50. If you go to a church that's only got 50, that's it. So anyhow, not to make light of it, but I think that's important to know that Jesus did that. He had circles of people that he was closer to. So the big three we see a lot more than the others and learn a lot more about them. Okay, so that was free. It didn't cost anything. Okay, how did Jesus deal with the 12? And we're going to start off with one that's familiar. He corrected them. He rebuked them sometimes. He praised them sometimes too, but we're not focusing on that tonight. The correction thing, if you've been here all the other weeks, you've seen this one before. When they came out of the crowds, when some wanted to be a follower and then some decided to be a follower, Jesus did this with all of them. He corrected them. He told them when they had the wrong attitude or the wrong doctrine or the wrong beliefs. He told them where they were wrong. So let's start with that one. Jesus corrected them and rebuked them. And since these 12 were closer to him, and especially the three, if you will, I think we'll see that he corrected them, rebuked them a little more harshly sometimes. He was closer to them, and they had a pretty important mission. We'll talk about that in a little while. All right, let's start with the Samaritan village that Jesus and his 12 went to in Luke chapter 9. Verse 53 is where we'll start. It says, "But the people did not receive him because his face was set toward Jerusalem. And when his disciples James and John saw it, they said, 'Lord, do you want us to tell fire to come down from heaven and consume them?' But he turned and rebuked them." All right, so he's got this very diverse group, if you will. He's got two boys in it that he nicknamed them the Sons of Thunder. They were probably pretty rowdy. They were fishermen. They'd come from that life, and they had a little temper and a little ego, and they had a little bit of everything. And on this occasion, when the Samaritan village didn't pay any attention to Jesus, rejected him in a way, probably because it says his face was set toward Jerusalem. He was heading to Jerusalem to worship. And the Samaritans figured that out. They didn't worship in Jerusalem. And since Jesus was going that way, they didn't listen to him or didn't pay attention to him or something, enough that James and John were offended. In fact, right before this, I think it was John that reported that he had seen somebody healing in the name of Jesus. And he said, "He's not one of us." He said, "Well, we got to stop that. We got to put a stop to that." And Jesus said, "No, we don't. If they're not against us, then they're for us." So he had already corrected John just a few verses before, but here the boys, the Sons of Thunder, say, "We want to play Elijah on this one. Let's call down fire, burn these people up." And Jesus rebuked them. It'd be interesting to know what that rebuke consisted of, but he corrected them on the spot and said, "Nope, that's not what we're here for. I didn't come to destroy, I came to build up." So he corrected James and John. Another story of corrections in Matthew 15. And here we could read more of it, but I gave you the highlights here. Jesus had told a parable. He had talked about hand washing. The Pharisees had got on him because his apostles didn't ceremonially wash their hands. This will come up later when we talk about religious principles versus tradition. But anyhow, they'd got on him that your followers don't wash their hands ceremonially, and he had told them that they were hypocrites. He jumped all over the Pharisees like he did sometimes. And then he turned to the people and told them, it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles a man, it's what comes out of the mouth. And Peter said to him here in verse 15, explain the parable to us. Peter didn't get it. And Jesus said, are you still without understanding? In fact, the NIV says, are you still so dull? I'm not sure that's the best translation, but it's kind of interesting that he might have said something like that. Peter didn't get it, and Jesus was upset with him. You ought to understand this by now. And as we go through our study of the apostles, we'll find that they didn't get it a lot of times. And on this occasion, Jesus corrected him. He said, are you still not understanding this? And then he explained it to Peter. And like I said, we'll get into all of the lesson later. But it'd be interesting to know the tone of the rebuke. I've often thought that it'd be nice to have an audio recording of Jesus and exactly how he said things. But I think he was pretty put out with Peter at this point, and asked him why he hadn't got it yet. All right, one more about correcting. We're going to read some more of this one, perhaps Matthew 16. Go back a little bit before this. I didn't put all the verses on there. But right before this, Jesus had asked them, who do people say I am? And they told him what they had heard. And then he asked Peter, who do you say that I am? And that's when Peter made the confession that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of God. And if you remember that story, which you ought to, Jesus praised him, complimented him for knowing that, for understanding that, and went on to tell him that he would give him the keys to the kingdom. Went kind of overboard, telling Peter how good he had done. Good job, Peter. You got it figured out. Immediately after that, seems like the same moment, perhaps, this happened. It says, from that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you're not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of men. All right, if you read that whole passage, you almost get whiplash. Jesus goes from praising Peter for understanding who he was and complimented him on that and told him he was going to have the keys to the kingdom. He'd get to start the church and all of that. And within minutes, he's calling him Satan. Okay? Get thee behind me, Satan. And then he explains what he means by that. You've got your mind in the wrong place. You've got your mind set on the things of men, not the things of God. I just told you I've got to go to Jerusalem, and they're going to persecute me, and they're going to kill me. And I'm going to be raised on the third day. You just said I was the Son of God. And now you're saying, no, we're not going to let that happen to you. To say that, Peter had to be thinking earthly stuff, which a lot of times the apostles seemed to think that. We'll see James and John later do exactly the same thing, thinking about an earthly kingdom somehow. But for Jesus to tell Peter, "Get thee behind me, Satan. You're working for the devil." That's not how one of my apostles talks. That's how Satan talks. In fact, that was one of the temptations that Satan leveled at Jesus. So he recognized Satan's lies and recognized that this time they were coming out of Peter's mouth. So pretty strong rebuke. Pretty real strong rebuke. I'm not sure I've ever called anybody Satan. I've suspected people were working for him sometimes, but I'm not sure I called anybody specifically that, but Jesus called Peter Satan. Okay, so those are some correction kind of things, and like I said, a little harsher than some of the corrections we've seen so far because of who these 12 were and what they were going to do. Okay, now we're going to summarize that a little bit and make some applications. If you've been here the other classes, we've gone through all of it, and then at the end we try to make a few applications. There's so much in the apostles' story that we're going to summarize and apply each one as we go. So let's talk about Jesus correcting them and what can we learn from that in 2026. How's that apply if we're supposed to walk in his steps? Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit. First, let's think about why he corrected them. Why was he so harsh in some ways? He had very high expectations for these 12. Okay, they were going to be given a great responsibility. Okay, so he treated them a little harsher than somebody that had come out of the crowd and asked him a question that wasn't the brightest question in the world. He rebuked them pretty harshly here. He expected a lot out of them. He had a big job ahead of them. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, once again, how we disciple people and all that. Probably the thing that popped into my head was back a number of years ago, for a few years, we had an intern around here, a preaching intern that we got out of a preaching school that was ready to go into the field and be a preacher. But we found out that graduates of preaching school, about 50% of them last less than 3 years because they're not seasoned, they don't have any experience, they don't know how to deal with conflict and a lot of things. So we started a program of hiring one for a year and kind of exposing them to Northside and how we do things here. Let them preach some, let them teach some classes, let them get involved in some ministries. And while we were doing that, I worked a little more closely with them, and I was probably pretty harsh sometimes. I knew what they were going to get into. I knew the responsibility that they were going to have. And so during that year, we tried to correct some of the things. They worked with me and with the elders and the staff, and their wives worked with the elders' wives a lot. And I think it was a very successful program. 2 of the 3 are still very, very active in ministry and doing well at what they do. So I think it was useful, but I told them things and said things to them sometimes that young guy gets up here on Wednesday and does a Devo, I wouldn't say it to him because I had higher expectations. I knew the responsibility that they were going to get into. So as we disciple people, I think maybe we can learn something from Jesus there, that those that you expect a lot out of and you see a lot of potential in, you're probably a little stricter with them in some ways. All right, what did he correct them about? The two biggies in the things that we looked at there, number one was their attitude. Okay, James and John got offended by some folks in Samaria and said, let's smoke them. Well, let's call down fire on them. Okay, they had an attitude, and the previous example of the guy that was healing in their name, in Jesus' name, they had an attitude that if they weren't all in, then we'll get rid of them. Okay, they had a bad attitude. The other thing, that the harsh rebuke of Peter, was that Peter was thinking worldly instead of godly. Okay, so as we attempt to disciple people, those are probably a couple of pretty good tips there that we could think about. Why do we want to, or when should we rebuke them, and what for? Another verse that, where am I here? Yeah, applications. Okay. Let's work on this just a little bit about us rebuking people or correcting people. Paul said this in Romans 15. He said to the Roman church, he said, I myself am satisfied about you, my brothers, that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, and able to instruct one another. Other translations say able to admonish one another. Okay. Sometimes we get the idea that, maybe elders can admonish, but we shouldn't be telling anybody else how to do things. Well, Paul told the Roman church, he said, you got enough goodness and you got enough knowledge that you can admonish one another. When you see a wrong attitude, when you see a worldly thought instead of a godly thought, you can point it out. I'm not saying we ought to tell people they're Satan, but we can correct. We ought to be able to do that. Okay? I realize there's dangers in that. Some people aren't mature enough to do it well and shouldn't do it. In fact, let's look at another verse that tells us that. Galatians 6 says, brothers, if anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. Okay, this wasn't written to the elders. This was written to the churches in Galatia, that we're all in the same family and we ought to watch out for each other. And if somebody gets caught in a transgression, spiritual people ought to correct them, ought to restore them, get them back to where they ought to be. Okay? Once again, I realize there's a whole lot of danger here that some people are too judgmental. Some people were not born with tact. Some people are too harsh about everything. But still, those verses are in there. They say Christians ought to be able to correct each other, to admonish each other, to instruct each other, to restore each other. Okay, one more. 1 Peter 5:5 says, in the same way, you who are younger, submit yourself to your elders. And Hebrews 13:17 makes it a little clearer. It says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they're keeping watch over your souls as those who will give an account. Okay. This is specifically about elders, I believe, and elders should be more mature and more spiritual and qualify for this. Some might not be in some places, but they should be. But I think the principle, well, I know the principle because we just read it in Romans and Galatians. The principle is that more spiritual, more mature people should help less mature, less spiritual people. And you do that by correcting, by admonishing, by instructing. We're told the older women are supposed to train the younger women. Okay, supposed to teach them. Okay, we do that in different ways. Titus 2 ministry is based around that concept that older women get together with younger women, and the younger women can tell them what troubles they're having or what's going on in their life, and the older women should have some wisdom for them. Should be able to tell them when they're going the wrong direction, when they're thinking too worldly and not enough godly, when they got a wrong attitude. Older, spiritual, mature women ought to be able to do that. And the whole concept of submission, I'm not sure we understand it very well sometimes. I know we don't sometimes. If we did, we'd probably do a whole lot different when the elders or a more mature Christian talk to us about something. And I realize you got to have some kind of relationship and all of that. You can't just come out of the blue to somebody. But if church is functioning right, what Jesus did with his 12, we ought to be able to model as we deal with people that need discipling, that need to grow up. Okay, so that's our application on that one. Hope that, helps some. All right, let's squeeze one more in here. Jesus corrected and rebuked them. The other thing he did with the 12 was he worked on trust. He taught them, he did things to show them that they could trust him. Okay. Now, bear in mind, he had picked these 12. Okay, so they had some kind of qualities and characteristics that he knew would be needed to do the job they had, but they still needed to trust him more. Okay, so let's look at a couple of verses where he worked on trust issues. Luke chapter 5. He had got into Peter's boat to talk to the crowds because the multitudes were there. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch." And Simon answered, "Master, we've been at it all night. We've been fishing all night and we got nothing. They are not biting today." I don't want to do that. We're tired. We don't want to go out there. But at your word, I'll let down the nets. And when they had done this, they enclosed a large number of fish, and their nets were breaking. They had to get other fishermen to come help them haul it all in. So Jesus, why else did he do this? He was teaching trust. He was saying, if I tell you there's fish out there, if I tell you to go, you go. Okay? And Peter maybe learned a little bit that day. He still needed a little training, but that was a lesson in trust. Okay, a little bigger lesson in trust was walking on the water. Famous one. We've all heard that sermon a number of times. the boat got away from Jesus while he was praying, and when the disciples saw him, he just came walking out to them. When they saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it's I. Don't be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water. He came to Jesus, but when he saw the wind, he was afraid. Beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" Okay, learning the lesson of trust here. And Peter trusted enough to get out of the boat. That's pretty good. That's real good. But then he got to thinking. He got to looking around and saying, "Man, I don't think I'm supposed to be walking on water." And Jesus saved him. Jesus grabbed him and took hold of him. But then he said, "You don't have enough faith. Why did you doubt?" See, Jesus had been teaching these lessons on trust, and he got to this point, and Peter still had doubts. And I admit that would be a good place to have a doubt when you're out walking in the middle of a storm on a sea. Let's see, one more verse. Luke 9, verses 1 through 6. He called the 12 together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases, and he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal. And he said to them, "Take nothing for your journey, no staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money, and don't even have 2 tunics." Okay, we don't preach that passage very often, but it's pretty interesting. Don't take anything. Just go out into the countryside and start preaching. When you go to a house, stay there, etc. Is the rest of the passage. But take nothing for your journey, no staff, nor bag, nor bread, nor money, and don't even have 2 coats. Why would he tell them that? Well, when the Israelites started wandering in the wilderness, what did God tell them? You'll be all right. Your shoes aren't going to wear out. Your clothes aren't going to wear out. I'll provide food. He was teaching them that even in the wilderness, they could trust him. And that's what Jesus was doing here. He sent them on a very important mission trip, gave them special powers, but told them not to take any supplies, that he'd take care of it. Okay, let's go just a couple minutes over and talk about applications on this. He taught them to trust him, and we should disciple people. We should teach people to trust. We do that differently than Jesus. We don't give them power to do miracles, but we tell them things that have happened in our life. More mature, more spiritual people tell them, "This is what God did for me. You can trust him." Now, the application I want to make on this is that trust is not blind trust. Sometimes we get confused about that, and we think if we trust that we can just do anything or expect anything and all that. Jesus told us to be wise as serpents. He told us to kind of understand the world we're operating in. He told us to be a little careful. In fact, this verse, this is at the end, when he got ready to leave them. And he said, when I sent you out with no money bag or a knapsack or sandals, did you lack anything? And they said, nothing. And he said to them, now I'm leaving you. You're going to go out and do this mission. Now, let the one who has a money bag take it, and likewise a knapsack, and let the one who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. Okay. On this mission, you trust me. I'm going to help you and all that, but you're going into some places where you need to understand the world you're in. You need to buy a sword. Okay, there's robbers on the road. Okay, so, and the reason I make this point is I've heard and seen potential preachers and missionaries and something like that say, this is God's plan and I'm just going to go and it's all going to work out. Well, you need to do a little planning. You need to make a little accommodation for the world that you're in and figure out how to do this and do it right. I'm not saying the balance is always easy to find, but I think most of you that have been around very long have seen people like that. Best illustration I ever heard of it actually was a joke. So I tell you early, so you'll know you're supposed to laugh at this one. But this father had a daughter bring a boy home. And after dinner, the mother said to the father, go find out what this kid's like. And so he took him over into his study and asked him a few things. And he said, what's your plans? He said, well, I'm a Bible scholar. He said, I'm going to Bible school. And he said, oh, okay. Said, it's a good plan. He said, how are you going to provide for my daughter? And he said, well, I'll tend to my studies, and God will supply. And he said, okay, how are you going to buy her a ring for this engagement? He said, well, I'll tend to my studies, and God will provide. And he kept asking him questions like that. What's going to happen when you have children? How are you going to provide for them? He said, well, I'll stay true to studying the Bible, and God will provide. So he sent the kid home, and afterwards the wife said, how'd that go? And he said, the bad news is he has no job and no plans. But the good news is he thinks I'm God. So trust, but not blind trust. We need to do a little accommodating for the world, I think. Okay, next time we will talk about how he taught them to serve, and we'll be getting started on our apostles. It'll take us a few weeks to get through the 12. Sorry we went a bit over. There's no drama tonight, but you can still visit right in here if you want. Thanks for your attention.